But hopefully, this will give you some ideas about maybe narrowing down on a topic and resources that'll help you identify those specific things. So I think, Adrian, you're in a good place. Like you have a general idea of what you want to look at. That's perfect for November timeframe. And so now the goal is really to narrow down and hone in on, okay, what about this specific thing? What about plants am I interested in? Or what about this? What about this? Um, and so today we'll talk about, again, narrowing down your ideas, some resources to help with that, and then I'm going to touch on some examples from past finalists, and then we'll talk about some primary sources as well. Um, so for background research, we are in the first two parts of the QLI project, that is identifying a QLI issue and then narrowing down the issue. So the first one, just identifying a QLI issue, you're starting really broad. If you were in the last webinar, we saw the funnel method, but you start really broad. So environmentalism or plants or healthcare, that's a very broad topic. And you can identify quality of life issues in all of those, right? So in healthcare, a quality of life issue would be anything that harms the well-being of maybe a patient or the doctor or nurses. Nurses are overworked, so overworked. So that's a QLI project right there. Patients aren't necessarily taken seriously, especially autistic patients. They aren't taken as seriously as other patients. And we also have research that doctors' attitudes towards neurodiversity, towards autism, will affect the level of care that they give and they provide. And this is further compounded for communities of color, especially Black women. So there are a lot of issues just within the healthcare bucket that are quality of life issues that do affect people's well-being negatively, right? So that's kind of this process that we're in right now is really narrowing down and trying to hone in on that specific research question or that um, specific issue. Okay. And I want to just touch on real quick the requirements for this background research. And this process will, like background research will hopefully help you to narrow down your thoughts and ideas. Um, but for the project, remember you have to create a proposal, a QLI proposal that is between 10 and 17 pages. And that's what you will submit to the competition at the end of the year. Three of those pages has to be on background research. Okay. So, you're, Adrian, you were thinking about plants as maybe a very broad topic. Um, and so as you're going through the background research, uh, process, some information that you will need to have in this section of your proposal would be to describe the quality of life issue, describe the problems, and then answer the question. So, what is the history of the issue? Or how did the issue or problem come to exist? How does it affect quality of life? So this is just like defining like how and why is this an issue for the community? Why is this important? Why is it important to understand this topic? We could go back to my example of autistic patients and healthcare and how they're treated differently. Um, why is this issue important? Because everybody deserves quality healthcare. That's a good answer right there. Who, if anyone is currently working to address this issue, you could go to Google and Google what are some organizations fighting for autism advocacy in healthcare. Um, so this process of background research is all about understanding the issue, understanding our broad concept in more specific ways. It's like slicing it in different ways so we can look at different pieces of it, right? So maybe there's some policies on healthcare and treating patients with disabilities. The ADA is one of them that I can think of. And then are there any non-government organizations, non-for-profits, community groups that are addressing your issue? So this goes with who is currently working to address this issue. So these questions are not, they're here to guide your process, to guide your background research, to help you think about what to search in Google, right? To help you, again, narrow down on that specific research question. And then I just want to mention again, this background research section has to be at least 3 pages. So 3 pages double spaced minimum. And then another thing I wanted to touch on for your proposal, there are some requirements. So I mentioned like going into Google and searching and finding sources. You have to have, excuse me, you have to have 8 citations total for your QLI proposal that you will submit in April for the competition. 7 of the 8 citations must be secondary sources cited in the background research section. In our next webinar, we'll talk about exactly what those citations look like. But now all I want you to know is you need 7 secondary sources. Now, what is a secondary source? That could be an article you find on Google. It could be a book that you read somewhere. It could be a YouTube video that talks about your issue. It could be any of these things, right? Something that someone else created that you're reading and processing. Okay, that's a secondary source because you're not the creator of it, right? Um, one of your 8 citations, and you'll notice 7 of 8, so 7 - 8 is 1. You need one citation that is a primary source cited in your background research or field research section of your proposal. So this primary source has to be like firsthand data. Okay. So maybe you're conducting interviews in your community about your QLI issue. Maybe you're doing a survey in your school, again, about your QLI issue. These are both examples of primary sources because you are gathering the data. We'll go through some more examples later. But the real difference between a primary and a secondary source is secondary sources, you didn't get the data, but primary sources, you did get the data. And welcome, welcome, Gordon. We're just getting into the background research section. I just have a few questions if you want to throw them into the chat, Gordon. Do you have a topic yet? It could be very broad, very general, or specific. I'm just curious where you're at in the process. So moving along for background research, and again, this section of your proposal, overall proposal, has to be 3 pages minimum. So we really want to get in the background research section, we want to get a full idea and picture of your quality of life issue. Okay, how it affects the community, who it affects, why it's so pervasive, why it's important to understand it, right? We need to answer all of these questions in this background research section. And I want to talk about this example here. This is one of our finalists from last year, Tea Time Tech, Art, Anxiety, and the Power of Digital Expression. So this student, her quality of life issue was anxiety amongst high school students. And I pulled this quote from her proposal. She said, high school students across all grade levels frequently face mounting academic pressures, social challenges, and emotional strain, conditions that often culminate in heightened anxiety. So this is her quality of life issue. This is how she summarized it, right? So she was able to put it into a one sentence structure. We have high school students, that's the population across all grade levels, so 9 through 12, frequently face mounting academic pressure. So there's a cause, social challenges, and emotional strain. Boom, boom, boom. 3 things uh, uh, that high school students are facing now. And then she continues, conditions that often culminate in heightened anxiety. So this is the effect. So she's looking at anxiety, heightened anxiety in high school students, and thinking about the causes of academic pressure, social challenges, and emotional strain. And so, from this quality of life issue, there are some different ways that you can move into the background research section. So she and you may not have a very like precise, specific quality of life issue right now in your mind, but you could still go through this process, even with a more general idea. So let's just take the general idea of anxiety in high school students. All right. So your next steps would be let's do research on the causes of anxiety in high school students. So research on the academic pressure. Maybe you look at, oh, typo. Maybe you look at trends over the last 20 years. Maybe you do research on social pressure, another cause. So thinking about cause and effect. And then you do research on rates of anxiety amongst high school students, right? So I think it's really important to be able to summarize your quality of life issue in like a 1 to 2 sentences so that you have a very specific direction that you can go to next, right? And it doesn't have to be like here are my 3 reasons, da 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 da. Definitely not not required. Everybody's proposal is different, everybody's project is different. But being able to summarize it in like 1 or 2 sentences will be really helpful for you going forward in the research process. And so I want to continue with her example. In her background research section, we'll recall, I pulled out, maybe you could do, if this is your issue, you could do research on academic pressure, social pressure, and anxiety rates. There are different things that you can research to get a full picture of the issue. So in her background research section, she looked at global statistics of 6 to 7% of youth experience anxiety disorder. And then the rest of the quote was, in the United States, 1 in 4 high school students will experience anxiety. Um, Further, she says many anxious teens struggle with self-regulation, leading to maladaptive coping, such as avoidance or rumination. This is when you're like thinking about negative experiences, thinking about that conversation you had with your friend that didn't go well, arguing with your friend while you're trying to go to sleep in your head. So she's really painting a full picture of what anxiety looks like for high school students. Research supports the idea that, she continues, research supports the idea that creative expression, especially through art, provides a valuable emotional outlet. So now we're moving into what can we do about anxiety? Like, how can we fix it? And then she finished with, or another piece that I wanted to pull out. Harpazi et al. Interviewed teens who participated in art therapy. The students reported that having dedicated therapeutic hour during schools provided a much needed opportunity to relax. This answers the question of who else is studying this or who else is looking at anxiety and trying to address it, right? So with her background research section, we have a really good picture of in the world of anxiety in high school students. We have the statistics. We have what it looks like on a day to day, the avoidance, the rumination. We have possible solutions, creative expression, and then we have examples of what other people are doing to address the issue. Okay, so we have a really good foundation to then move into our next steps of the project. So I think this is a really great example for how to narrow down that topic. Okay, how to narrow down your quality of life issue and really paint the picture of how it's affecting people on the day to day. So now we're going to transition into resources. And by the way, if any of you have questions throughout, please, you can come off mute, you can send them in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. But now we're going to go through some examples of resources to help you get started with the background research. Because maybe you don't know, like, well, what do I Google? How do I even like ask a question? That could be where you're stuck on. And students last year have asked me that exact same question. Well, what do I search into Google? What do I type? I would start with your topic, right? Plants or healthcare. You can search in Google quality of life issues related to plants, quality of life issues related to healthcare. Just start with that and see where that may take you. If you have a more specific topic, like the treatment of autistic patients in the healthcare system, then I would, again, just put that into Google. Um, and see where that takes you. Follow the rabbit trail. But some specific resources, news articles, these are great. The New York Times is great, Washington Post, BBC, any of the free ones are lovely. Don't pay, don't subscribe. Like, I think all news should be free, so subscription-based services, that's another quality of life issue. All right, let's talk about that. Anyway, news articles are great for understanding what's actually going on right now. Google Scholar, I have it highlighted, is probably one of my favorite websites because I'm a researcher at heart, a scientist at heart. So in Google Scholar, and it looks like this. You type in Google Scholar and it'll bring you to this, or it's scholar.google.com. You search your quality of life issue, and it'll pop up all of these different secondary sources that you could use in your research. It'll show you like scientific articles like this. So this is on the gut-brain axis. And this is a great way to find like scholarly articles to support your research, right? You can also go to the public library. They have tons of resources that you may not know of. So this is what it looks like. This is their research catalog. You just go to the New York Public Library website. At the top, there are these um, uh, buttons, words. You type research, and then you could just search your quality of life issue in the search bar, and it'll pull up things related. So that's another great resource. Nonprofits will also do like end of year reports. So these are data sources that you can use. So if your quality of life issue, again, I'm going to go back to autism and autistic patients, the treatment of them. So there are nonprofits that do work specifically in advocacy for the autism community, and you can look at their reports. What have they put out? And that's great secondary research. And then also government websites like the New York City, oops, I thought I had a picture of it. The New York City website is great. They have a lot of data that you can pull from. Yeah, it's a wonderful resource. But so those are some resources that are pretty good. And if you want to, I'll stay on here real quick. You can take a screenshot, take a picture. But these are great resources to start. And of course, you can also visit museums. Like if your quality of life issue is about representation in artwork from the Middle Ages, really interesting. You could go to the Met, or you could visit a art museum online and do observational research looking at representation in the portraits. That sounds fun, but um, yeah, all of these are different ideas that you can utilize. So these were all secondary sources. So remember, secondary sources, they've already done the data, and you're looking at what they've done. Now we're going to talk about primary sources. Primary sources are where you're collecting the data. You're getting the data and doing X, Y, and Z. So remember, for your proposal, you need 8 citations total. 7 citations have to be secondary sources. One of them has to be a primary source. Okay. So primary sources are um, like first-hand data, first-hand accounts of something. So it could be original artwork, it could be newspaper articles from the time of an event. This is like first-hand information that has not been edited by somebody else. So another nuance in the difference between primary and secondary is secondary sources have already been analyzed by somebody else. Okay. Primary sources have not. So you will be doing the analysis. You'll be looking at it, and that's a primary source. So it's like you're taking the data. So examples could be historical artifacts, personal letters, diaries, photographs, government documents like laws and policies, speeches, interviews, interview transcripts, autobiographies, scientific lab notebooks. So wherever you're getting like firsthand data, that would be a primary source. Um, it could also be like original field research. So in your QLI project, you could be doing interviews of people in your community. You could be conducting surveys and focus groups. These are examples of primary sources. You can also use open data sets. I talked about the New York government website. There is a New York open data website, and this would be a primary source as well. Um, so you could go here and find data about different things that you're interested in. Like last year, one of the students, she went to this website and found data on suspension rates in New York City elementary schools. She took that raw data and then used it in her project and then did some statistics like averages and so on. And that was her field research, and that was her primary source. So this is another way that you can conduct some background research, narrow down on your topic, and also get the check mark for that primary source. Um, Sorry, my train of thought left the station. For interviews, and I want to specifically talk about interviews because a lot of students will conduct interviews as part of their QLI project. And this is, again, a primary source for your project, for you to get a better understanding, a better picture of the quality of life issue. So when you're interviewing an expert, it's important to identify who is the best person to interview. So what is an expert? Who is an expert? Excuse me. Just some examples that I was thinking of are like government officials, people working in government. You can always reach out to your city council members, your local council members, the mayor's office, the borough president's office. Anybody working in the government departments, you can reach out to them. Heads of agencies are also experts. Also, like heads of nonprofits, so leadership teams and nonprofits, these would be good people to reach out to. And then professors as well are experts. They would know a lot about a particular topic, right? And so, if you're interested in conducting an interview, there are just some things to keep in mind to make sure that we are as professional as possible, because you are representing not just yourself, but your school, you're representing your community, you're representing WISE as well. Um, and some things to think about. So, when you're reaching out to experts, I'm assuming that it's through an email format. Um, Always start with like, Dear Miss, Mr. Mix. Introduce yourself, tell them about what you're researching, tell them about why you're interested in um, learning from them, hearing from them, and how they can be of service and of use. Um, uh, yeah, be very clear about what you want from them and how they can help you. Again, we're thinking about networking, connections, and one thing that's really important for community work is the biggest impact is with collaboration, is with coalition building. You can have a pretty strong impact on your own, but you will always have a larger impact when you work together with other organizations, with other individuals. It's all about building coalitions, right? And that's something that I want you all to get through this program, to understand on an experiential level through this program. And then lastly, you can always ask them, if you're not the right person, then who should I reach out to? But worded a little bit different, you would say, is there anyone else that you can recommend that I contact about this topic? Um, and if and once you get in touch with somebody, they may be really interested in your research and will be glad to show you, to recommend you or to introduce you to a colleague. And one other thing I wanted to say about interviewing experts is keeps following up, keep sending out emails. Don't get discouraged when you get a rejection, a no, or just no response, or you get ghosted. by someone you're trying to interview. Take a deep breath, take another deep breath, and then contact somebody else. Keep reaching out to people, and you will get a yes. You will get that person that says, sure, let's have an interview. Da, da, da. And if you need support, if you need help, assistance, you can always reach out to me, and I will be glad to make connections for you and introduce you to people. Yeah, I'm here as a resource as well. Okay, so one more example. I want to follow through with this tea time tech, art, anxiety, and the power of digital expression. In thinking about narrowing down a topic and primary sources, one thing that she did to really narrow down her topic was she conducted an interview. She interviewed somebody from her school to get a better sense of anxiety at her specific school. So this is something that you could do as well. Conduct interviews in your community about your issue or about your general idea to help you narrow down and also get a better understanding of maybe how the community is feeling or how the community is affected, right? So this quote I pulled from her work, she said, after receiving approval from my school's institutional review board, and this is something your teacher will know if it's unfamiliar for you, um, I began with a pre-implementation interview with the high school freshman. I asked open-ended questions such as, how often do you feel pressured by schoolwork? And do you feel like your school takes into account the amount of workload its students get? So this is a very great example of how to conduct an interview and also how to write about an interview, right? So asking open-ended questions are really important. And then questions that help to narrow in on on the experience, right? Because quality of life is a measurement of someone or a community's well-being. And in order to understand that experience, you really need to let them speak for themselves, let them self-advocate, right? If you're going back to my example about autistic patients in healthcare, if you want to learn more about their experience, you have to talk to them. It's one thing to read secondary sources and articles about experiences, but speaking directly with the population affected is the most effective way, the most important way to learn about that experience, their experiences, right? So interviews are very powerful primary sources that you can use in this process to help narrow down your ideas. I want to give one more example, and this is also a finalist from last year. This is The Cost of Ignorance, an incredible project all about financial literacy and the lack of financial education for New York City high school students. And this student, he also utilized the technique of interviews to learn more about and to narrow down on his topic, right? To get the bigger picture and also to narrow it down. So this quote I'm pulling from his proposal, he says, David Anderson, the president and CEO of Wise, claimed that, quote, it's one thing to sit in a class and listen to a teacher talking about budgeting or investing. It's another to actually do it. At Wise, we're believers in applied learning, learning by doing. And he also, I wanted to include this citation, and this, we'll talk about citations in the next webinar, but just to have this is how he cited his interview. It's perfect. Um, so if you do conduct interviews in your own project, this is a great way to cite them. But this quote, so this student, he interviewed the CEO of a nonprofit whose mission is focused on financial literacy. So this person that he interviewed, David, is probably an expert in the field, is likely an expert in the field. And through this interview, he quoted what David was saying, and it really painted a bigger picture about financial education, right? So the focus is on doing and applying what you're learning, not just listening to a teacher speak. And so this interview really gave more color to the picture of financial education, right? And so this is another way that you're able to, or another example of narrowing down on a topic and really honing in on the effects and what other people are doing to address the issue, really building that background research to be as strong as possible. And that is everything that I have. Some things that I'll leave you with just to recap. I want to go back to the beginning here. Um, when we're thinking about background research, and if you have a very broad idea or concept that you're wanting to turn into a project, background research can really help you narrow down that your ideas, right? So background research in the form of, oops, finding secondary sources online like Google Scholar, the public library, government websites, news articles. This is a great way to understand the picture of your quality of life issue. And then you can also conduct interviews, surveys, focus groups to again learn even more about the experiences of people who are affected by your quality of life issue. So remember, a big part of this project is for you to identify issues that are affecting the community and to address them, right? That's the next step, but identifying issues that are affecting your community. So your background research section will do just that. Will make the case that this is my issue. This is why it's an issue. Here's how it's affecting the community, and here's what we're going to do about it, right? So you're painting the whole picture of this quality of life issue, okay? And I cannot wait to read all of your background research sections and uh, um, uh, again, lost my train of thought. She left the station. Just like the E train, it never shows up or it leaves whenever you need to get on. But I'm so excited to read your background research sections. They're going to be super strong um, and so convincing, right? So if you have any questions, for those of you who are here, you can throw them in the chat. You can come off mute, whatever you feel more comfortable about. But please, if you have any questions whatsoever, um, speak now or forever hold your peace.